I'm Pamela from Fibersprite.com, and in the last two videos I shared with you the unboxing and assembly of the Cricket Quartet. The Cricket Quartet is a attachment or an accessory that lets you convert your rigid heddle Cricket loom into a 4-shaft table loom. I am using mine with a stand here. You could use it either with the stand that Shacked sells as an accessory, or you could use it as a true table loom on a table. So in this video, what I wanted to talk about was how it is to actually weave on it, and what I think are good things about the loom, what I think are some of the small challenges that the loom has, and again, tips and tricks for working with this particular loom. So in this review, I'm going to go from top to bottom, and so that's not necessarily the way that I personally think about the loom as a whole, because it's a bunch of interchangeable parts. They all work together, but I just thought going top to bottom would make sure that I got all the bases covered. At the top, we've got the levers. They work fine. The point of the levers is to raise and lower each shaft, and they do that just fine. They are smooth, they work fine. When they first came out of the box, I did notice there was quite a lot of squeaking on this wood. It was really loud, it was really painful. And what I did was I just put a little bit of silicone oil, I'll link to that in my post, just a little bit on these moving parts. The tiniest bit really helped to quiet that down, and it made it so much more pleasant to work with. Beforehand, I would not have been able to talk to you while raising and lowering the shaft. So that is a slight drawback. It's just the sound of the wood rubbing is all it is, and just that little bit of oil really helped to solve that problem. The other thing that I've noticed with these shaft levers is the way that they are anchored and attached to the loom itself. There are these two blocks that are sort of shafts 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and there's a space between them that's about the width of my pointer finger, and it's fine, it's usable. It doesn't give me a whole lot of grief, but what I did notice was that the distance between 1 and 4, if I'm weaving a twill and I need to raise 1 and 4, I'm going to use my pointer finger and my pinky finger to do that motion, and it is almost a stretch for me. I can do it, so it's not impossible, it's not too terribly difficult, but it is a little bit of a stretch. And so it would be nice if this space was just a tiny bit smaller, or if they were mounted so that they were evenly spaced. So this little space just happens to throw me off just a tiny bit. In terms of using the levers, I did learn how to weave on a table loom, and so using the levers is pretty simple. You just have to know where you are in the pattern, just like on a floor loom. And there is a little bit of interruption between weaving. So when I am weaving and I am selecting my levers, I select the levers, I send a shot through of yarn or a weft pick, put them down, select the next set of levers, and weave. And so what the implications of this is that I'm always having to be juggling my hands and my yarn, and it can get kind of tedious. And I've always found that on a floor loom, the action of treadling with my feet and then throwing the shuttle with my hands, that is like a whole body motion that keeps me really engaged, it keeps me involved, it keeps me interested in weaving. And that is not as easy for me to do on a table loom. I have to say though, it's better for me than a rigid heddle loom because you've got the beater, you've got the shafts. Separating them into two separate things makes it go by a little bit quicker, as opposed to a rigid heddle loom where you have to lift it up to select the shafts, send the shot through, and then bring it down, and then push it down. So there's fewer physical actions. The actions are smaller, or at least it feels that way to me. And it is, I repeat, it is the way I learned. It's what I'm used to. There's nothing bad about it. I do prefer a floor loom, but this is a nice in-between in terms of the effort required. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the advantages that this loom has over a floor loom. So while a floor loom, like the big one behind me, those are my favorite to work on, this is a nice in-between between rigid heddle and a floor loom. One little surprise with the Cricket Quartet is this little shelf that's under the levers. So this little shelf, it has some pulleys in here to align the Texsolv for raising and lowering the shafts, and I find that it is the perfect little shelf for a shuttle. I would not store scissors here because there's always the risk that the scissors would fall down and cut your warp, or worse, cut your legs. I have had that happen to me when I'm working, so I wouldn't, not on this loom. I learned my lesson the hard way on a different project, but you don't want to have scissors, you don't want to have anything pointy, but when I am done weaving for the afternoon, this is a great place to put my shuttle when I'm done. So that secret shelf is something that I really love. So onto the heddles. The heddles on this loom are Texsolv, which is a nylon braided cord, and there are all different configurations of Texsolv. Texsolv heddles are really common, and they're expensive. They're not cheap, but nothing is these days, is it? And there are two big benefits to Texsolv heddles. The first is that they are quiet. And gosh, they are so quiet. You don't even know that they're there. The second advantage to Texsolv heddles is that they are very lightweight. So when you're constantly raising and lowering the shafts by hand, or if you're on a floor loom doing it with your legs, the Texsolv heddles make it easy to do. So quiet and easy on your body, that's great. I have woven on other table looms that use metal heddles, and they clink and clack and make so much noise that it's almost too painful for me to weave on. And so this is a huge advantage. This is actually one of the reasons why I went with the Cricket Quartet, was because I looked at some of the options that were on the marketplace, whether buying new or used, and I knew what they were going to sound like, and I knew that that wasn't something that I could work for long periods of time with. So Texsolv heddles, you do have to make sure when you're assembling the loom that you count them out. And you do have to make sure that when you are setting up your project, you have enough heddles for your project already on your loom. There's always ways to add new heddles. It's a little bit harder, it's a little bit more tedious. So just do yourself a favor and always make sure that you're counting out your heddles and that you have enough heddles for your project on each shaft. And that goes for any loom that you're using, not just the Cricket Quartet. So when we get down to the reed, it's attached to the beater, and this is something that if you're used to a rigid heddle loom, it's a little bit different because you have, all the reed does is separate the yarns and pack them in. It doesn't control which shaft they're on, whether they're up or they're down. The rigid heddle is a little bit different, where it has the slots and the holes. So the reed hook that Shacked gives you for the rigid heddle loom is this little guy right here, and it is designed to fit through the slots and the holes of a rigid heddle, but it's not much of a hook. And it's really, I found it really difficult to use with the reed on the Cricket Quartet. And to be honest, I have never used this hook on any other loom other than a rigid heddle loom, because that's what it's designed for. And it does what it needs to do well on a rigid heddle loom, but it's not great for other looms. So you're going to want to get yourself another reed hook. And there are all kinds of different reed hooks on the market. You could use, I've even seen some made out of fishing line, just little loops that pull string through. These are two of my favorites. This is one that Shacked makes. It has a hook on either end. It has a hole on one end. I tied some cord through it so I can put it on my wrist and never lose it. So if I drop it, it's still there and I can pick it right up. This is really great for the Cricket Quartet because it's so small. And the Cricket Quartet itself is small, so you don't have to be moving at awkward angles. This is another reed hook that I like. It's made by Harrisville Designs. It's got a narrow hook on one end and a bigger hook on the other end. It also works great with the Cricket Quartet. So do yourself a favor, get yourself a better reed hook. One of the things that I didn't realize until I actually started putting together the loom was that the Cricket Quartet actually loses 1.5 inches of weaving width because the shafts are placed on the inside of the existing structure of the loom, and then there's more space. You know, there's the uprights take some space, and then the shafts themselves take some space. So you actually are losing 1.5 inches. So on my 15-inch Cricket, the Cricket Quartet only weaves 13.5 inches. So that's just something to know. It wasn't something I really realized when I bought it. It's still big enough for what I want it to do, but it's something I wish I'd realized. I don't remember seeing that in the marketing materials. I'm gonna have to go back and check. But that was just one thing that I thought was, it was a surprise to me. It doesn't impact the usability of the loom to me. Like I said, you can still do plenty with 13.5 inches. And one thing that I did like about the way that it's set up is that there are these two bars on either side of the beater that hold that reed in place really nicely. And that means that when I'm winding on a warp, there's not going to be a lot of play side to side with that reed. I always had that problem when I was winding on a warp on the rigid heddle version because there's nothing anchoring it in place. So these two bars that hold it in place are really nice. I appreciate how sturdy it is in the framework. Two other things about the reed. One is that it's a brand new reed, so it comes with just a little bit of manufacturing oil on it. And the instructions say just wipe it off with a cloth or add a few inches or a yard to your first warp so that you can get all that extra oil off without damaging your projects. I did wipe it down with a damp or a dry cotton cloth, and I was not able to get all the oil off. However, on my first project, which is only about 1/2 inch wide, I did notice that the metal on the reed is a little bit of a different color than the metal on the other parts of the reed. So that tells me that it has come off onto my warp, and it would probably be in your best interest to just weave a test warp. 1, to get that oil off, 2, to get yourself acquainted with the loom and familiar with how it works, and just make sure that all that oil is nice and cleaned off. One more thing, I know I've said that already, but one more thing about the the reed on this is that it is a very specialized size. So it is it's shorter than some of your average reeds, especially say for this floor loom. my reeds can be as much as 4 inches, 5 inches tall, and whatever size I buy of reed, it really doesn't impact the function of that loom. But because this loom has a swinging beater, and because there's not a lot of space vertically for it to work with, and because of the way that it all goes together, you need to make sure if you're buying a different size reed that you're buying exactly the right size. So there are a few looms on the market that work that way. This is one of them, and that's just something to remember. So that's the reed. On to the beater. So the beater was probably my biggest learning curve on this loom. It is a swinging beater, and it took a lot of adjusting to get it right. I noted when I did my assembly video that that was one of the hardest parts to put together. It was the only part where maybe I could have used some help, was putting it together, because it swings back and forth. It's on this sort of a hinge. It was just really hard to keep everything square and aligned and get it all put together just the way it needed to be. So I did eventually get it on. Obviously, I did it without any help. I did it all myself, full disclosure. And yet, when I was really careful to make sure everything was adjusted just exactly the same so that it should swing and beat pretty freely and evenly. However, it didn't do that, and I was ending up with like a really crooked fell line, even though I was being very careful to always beat in the center and use an even beat and all those things. And what I realized was that I needed to do a little bit more adjustment on that beater so that it would swing evenly and beat evenly. So just know that that's a spot that's going to need some adjustment. All looms are going to need some adjustment, some tightening over time, and I'm expecting that this will be no different. And so you might want to check on the beater. Just double check yourself from time to time that the beater is doing what you want it to do. One of the things that I love about this loom, whether it's the Cricket rigid heddle version or the Cricket Quartet, is how compact it is. It's great for travel. It's great for, you know, this will fit easily in the back seat of my car. I have had some table looms that are bigger than any table I own, and so they have to have a stand. They take up a big amount of space in my house. This just tucks really nicely into a corner. And one of the things that's nice about this small footprint from front to back is that I can easily reach the back beam to change the tension. So I don't have to stand up, walk around, turn the crank, just make sure everything's right on my tension, just to advance 1 or 2 inches in the warp. So that is one of the best things about this loom. That is one of the idea that I would have to stand up and walk around the loom to adjust it every single time. That is always a kicker for me when I'm looking at a loom. I know myself, I know what works, I know what doesn't work. I know that if I'm going to have to do that, I'm probably not going to weave on that loom as much as I could. And if that's the case, I'm in a smaller studio now than I used to be, believe it or not. And so every piece of equipment has to earn the space that it takes up in my studio. And so even though I would really love it to be a tiny floor loom that I could use a break and advance without having to do these adjustments, or that I could treadle on it, this ability to reach back here, change the tension, advance the warp, that is huge to me. That is one of the best benefits of this loom. And with that comes another benefit, which is less loom waste. So when I talk to hand spinners who are spinning their own yarn and they want to get every ounce of mileage out of every single yard or meter that they've spun, a rigid heddle loom is what I recommend, because this small footprint means that there is less room for waste. On this big loom back here, I just took off a warp and I had this much waste at the back. So that is at least 2 feet. And this was the point where the loom no longer was making a shed. I could have manually held up the shafts and maybe gotten a few more inches, but this is quite a lot of waste. And this was the waste at the back. There was probably another 6 inches at the front. So we're talking almost a yard of waste. And there's definitely things that you can do with these leftovers, but if you're using a precious yarn, if you're using silk, if you're using hand spun, something that you've only got one skein of, the amount of waste that you have definitely matters. And on a Cricket, I would expect to have maybe a foot of waste. So that's a huge difference. And this, you know, if you're weaving a scarf, that can always be your fringe. So that's a huge benefit of this small front to back footprint. So the next part here at the bottom of the loom is how it attaches to the stand. So this is only if you're using a stand. And I have to say this is maybe a drawback of the stand design and not the loom design, but I found it needed to be tightened really tight. Otherwise it was wobbling, and every time I would beat, it would the loom would sort of drift down onto my lap, and then the beater would sort of come forward, and it just started to get really awkward. So just make it really tight. This may be something that you need to adjust over time. In my last video, I said something about how the screws were a different size than the screws that held the regular Cricket loom onto the stand. I went back and I compared them, and that's not true. They're the same screw. I just couldn't find my old Allen wrench. And I do think that's a drawback. I think that always having to find the exact right tool, especially with Allen wrenches, they grow legs and they walk away. They're like lost socks or pins. They just disappear. So having a different screw here might be nice, like maybe a thumb screw or a wing nut. I don't think that it would be in the way of the yarn. I don't think that it should get caught on your yarn the way that it might more often if you're using the rigid heddle action. So that's maybe a suggestion. Some people might be able to find those to modify the loom that way, and that might help. Once I got it tightened to where I liked it, I did find that it was okay enough to work with. From an overall standpoint, this loom is a lot sturdier than I thought it would be. It is still, you know, it's a table loom. It's not carved from granite or anything. It's not nearly as sturdy as the old shacked table looms that I learned on, but it is more compact. It's easier to find, and I do genuinely like it. And it's sturdier than I thought it would be. This is a linen warp that I'm weaving for a narrow band, and it is woven under quite a bit of tension, and it's doing just fine. So I'm very pleased with that. I have not tested the warp capacity yet. My suspicion is that it will hold a little bit more with this new setup than it would with the old Cricket setup where the back beam was here. I think you've just got a little bit more room to work with. So if you wanted to push the boundaries on the length of a warp that you're putting on, you could probably do that. So what are my final thoughts on the Cricket Quartet? All in all, I'm really pleased with how this functions. It had a few quirks that needed to be worked out and that took some getting used to, but that's common to any loom. So that's not a drawback. It's just every loom has its own quirks. Every loom has something that you need to learn about how it works before you're working really well with it. There are a lot of things that I really like about the Cricket Quartet, and I find that it functions really well as a table loom. I know that I would not have bought it if I didn't already own the Cricket rigid heddle loom. The Cricket Quartet itself is about the cost of a table loom that you might find on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or some other website that sells used looms. I would expect, what I learned from my first weaving teacher was that you pay $100 per shaft for a used loom. So a 4-shaft table loom you might expect to pay about $400 for. And then you price up or down based on condition of the loom, other features, things like that. So at $450, I think is the going price for the Quartet edition. That's, you know, about what you'd expect to pay. But then you have to also buy the Cricket rigid heddle loom, which I think is running about $210 to $240 now, depending on what the retailer is. So that would be pretty expensive. It's basically the cost of a brand new table loom. Is it worth it to switch back and forth? That really has to do with the kind of projects that you plan on doing. I had the Cricket because I was teaching a lot of rigid heddle classes to beginners who didn't necessarily want to go through the whole 4-shaft process. And that really had to do with accessibility, class pricing, time constraints, all those things. A rigid heddle is just quicker to get set up with. 4-shaft looms take longer, but I find them more pleasing to work with. So I don't expect to be switching back and forth very often, if at all. I'm already sort of weighing the options of whether or not I want to sell all the rigid heddle, the heddles themselves, or keep them with this loom. So that just tells you who I am as a weaver, that I prefer this 4-shaft, and I'm very happy with this setup as a 4-shaft loom. I think it would be great to take to workshops, demonstrations, other things like that. It's very portable still. I do have the bag that the Cricket goes in, and with this height edition, it's not going to fit into that bag, so I'm going to have to find some other way to transport it easily, but that's not a huge drawback. It's still very transportable. It's still easy to get in and out of the car if that's what I'm going to do with it. So I am very pleased with it. I'm glad that I purchased it, and I'm enjoying weaving on it. So I hope this video has helped you. I will be posting a few of my additional recommendations on my blog, which you can find at fibersprite.com, and I'll have links to all those things just for your convenience. Those will all be there. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye. P.S. Be sure to check out my YouTube shorts for more details and close-up shots of the Cricket Quartet.